Okay, so picture this. You have a state-of-the-art fire extinguisher. And I don't just mean it works well. I mean it is like precisely engineered for the exact blaze you are currently dealing with.
Right, the perfect tool for the job.
Exactly. And the house is actively burning. The flames are literally right there in the living room. But the extinguisher has just been sitting there, locked in a glass case in the hallway
Yeah.
for 17 months.
Wow, 17 months.
Yeah, all because nobody at the top actually gave the final order to break the glass.
And, to make that metaphor even heavier, that locked glass case is sitting right in the middle of the NAACP headquarters.
Yeah, that is a heavy metaphor.
It really is. The letters we're examining today, which were written in April 2026 by an educational advocate named Jimma Dogon McWilson, are essentially a desperate plea to Chairman Leon W. Russell and CEO Derek Johnson to, well, finally break that glass.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking a really profound stack of sources today. It's not just McWilson's letters, right? He anchors his entire argument in some incredibly foundational texts.
Oh, absolutely. He brings in Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro,
Right.
Juice Meerlew's The Rape of the Mind, Jacob H. Carruthers' Intellectual Warfare, and Hugh B. Price's Achievement Matters.
So our mission today is basically to figure out why a fully approved, cost-free educational campaign that was designed to protect 7 million black students is just sitting totally dormant. And we also need to unpack this intense 7-point ultimatum that demands immediate action.
Yeah, and the inclusion of those specific historical and psychological texts, it tells us right away that the author doesn't view this as some simple, administrative oversight.
It's way deeper than that.
Exactly. He frames this delay as a dire moral failure. I mean, when you invoke the miseducation of the Negro, you are pointing directly to the idea that the educational system is fundamentally designed to subordinate.
Right.
So McWilson is arguing that the NAACP has this systemic defense mechanism ready to go, and failing to deploy it is tantamount to institutional complicity.
But the urgency of this whole fire extinguisher metaphor, it really only makes sense when you realize just how long it's been sitting there. Like, the NAACP board didn't just hear about this yesterday. I'm looking at the timeline from the sources, and they unanimously approved this campaign back in October 2024.
Yes, unanimously. And that is the absolute crux of the frustration in these letters. The board approved the Best Academic Practice Models for Black Students Nationwide Network campaign without a single dissenting vote.
Wow.
And days later, an official letter went out to all 37 state conference presidents calling for action.
So the ball was rolling.
It was. By February 2025, they even had a comprehensive implementation plan approved. Yet, according to McWilson's letters from April 2026, which is 17 months later, the plan is essentially a ghost.
A ghost across all 37 state conferences and, 2,000 local branches?
Exactly. It just vanished.
Wait, if it had unanimous board approval, how does it just vanish into thin air? What is actually happening on the ground while this plan sits on a shelf?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at the author's incredibly specific terminology. He describes the current U.S. public school system's impact on Black African descendant students as, and this is a striking phrase, educational phagocytosis.
Educational phagocytosis. That is a really heavy biological metaphor.
Yeah.
If you think back to high school biology, phagocytosis is when a cell completely envelops, swallows up, and digests another particle.
Digested entirely, yeah.
So the author isn't just saying the system is passively failing these kids. He's saying it is actively digesting their identity.
Yes, instead of cultivating a student's creative and intellectual potential, the system consumes it.
Yeah.
And he traces that modern biological metaphor back to a historical psychological concept called enculturated menticide.
Menticide.
Yeah, this is where Juice Meerlew's The Rape of the Mind and the sources on psychic trauma become so relevant. Menticide is basically the systematic dismantling of a person's identity, values, and consciousness.
Okay, I understand the theory, but mechanically, what does menticide actually look like in, say, a third-grade classroom or a high school history course? How does a bureaucratic administrative delay connect to something that severe?
Well, the author points to the active removal of culturally affirming materials. So if a school system systematically removes African American studies or bans literature that reflects a student's heritage, it creates an environment where the student's historical identity is just starved.
Oh, I see.
There is a Steve Bagugo quote in the source material that anchors this perfectly. He says, "The most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed."
Wow.
The argument here is that if a student is never taught their own historical value, their potential is easily consumed by a system designed to marginalize them.
Right.
So an administrative delay isn't just a missed deadline on some spreadsheet. It leaves those children totally exposed to that psychological consumption without a shield.
That makes the stakes incredibly tangible for you as a reader.
Hmm.
But if this erasure has been a historical, centuries-long problem, why does the tone of these specific letters from April 2026 sound like a blaring siren? Like, why the sudden absolute panic?
The panic is tied to a very specific escalating threat that the author identifies, which is Project 2025.
Okay.
The letters explicitly argue that the dormant campaign was designed to act as a shield against what McWilson describes as a coordinated blitzkrieg of assaults on government education.
A blitzkrieg. So the timeline isn't arbitrary. The attacks, at least from his perspective, are accelerating, which makes that 17-month silence even more glaring.
Exactly.
How exactly do the letters characterize this blitzkrieg? What are they defending against specifically?
According to the text, this policy agenda involves several multi-layered attacks. The author cites the systematic dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at both the state and federal levels.
Right.
He also points to efforts to gut the Department of Education entirely, which he claims weaponizes federal funding to force ideological conformity.
And he also mentions Title I protections, right? Like the funding that specifically goes to schools with high percentages of low-income students.
Yes, the text highlights proposed executive orders that would specifically target those Title I protections and weaken civil rights enforcement in schools.
Wow.
It also points to the proliferation of state-level laws banning what the author calls honest history, which effectively silences discussions of systemic racism. And finally, the letters outline this aggressive, sustained push to defund and privatize public schools in the very communities where Black students are most concentrated.
Okay, so this fully approved NAACP campaign isn't just some generic after-school tutoring program. The letter treats these best academic practice models, and I know they specifically mention successful models like the ones in Ohio's Steubenville School District, as literal defensive armor for 7 million kids.
That's exactly how it's framed. Yeah, defensive armor.
So what do those Steubenville models actually do?
Well, the Steubenville models, and others like them, they focus on community-integrated academic support. So they don't just rely on the school district alone.
Okay.
They create a supplementary infrastructure of parents, volunteers, and local leaders who actively monitor and support student achievement. They provide the cultural affirmation and academic rigor that the author argues the state systems are currently trying to strip away.
See, you do not build a shield like that and then just leave it in the armory while a blitzkrieg is raining down on you.
No, you really don't.
Which brings us to, honestly, the biggest mystery of this whole deep dive. Whenever I hear about a massive nationwide rollout stalling across 2,000 branches, I immediately assume it's a money problem.
Oh, of course. That's always the assumption.
Right. You assume it requires a massive federal grant or like a billion-dollar fundraising drive, and the money just dried up.
Right. Institutional paralysis is almost always tied to resource constraints. But the sources reveal a detail that makes this 17-month delay genuinely baffling.
Yeah.
This campaign is entirely cost-free to the NAACP.
Completely cost-free.
Entirely. It asks for zero new funds. It asks for no paid staff to be hired. The entire model is designed to be executed by a unified nationwide network powered entirely by volunteers.
That is wild.
We are talking about students, parents, family members, and community advocates. It leverages the people who already have the absolute highest stakes in the survival and success of these children.
Then why the holdup? I mean, if a plan requires zero money, uses an existing network of 2,000 branches, relies on passionate family volunteers, and defends against a threat you explicitly acknowledge is happening right now.
Right.
What is the bottleneck? Is this just classic institutional inertia? How does an organization that massive just stall?
Well, it is a textbook example of the sociology of massive legacy organizations. You see, passing a board resolution is fundamentally a signaling mechanism.
Oh, yeah.
It tells the public, we agree this is a problem and we agree with this concept. But moving from a conceptual agreement to active on-the-ground deployment, that requires disrupting the internal status quo.
Well, for sure.
It requires moving resources, shifting focus from other projects, and implementing strict accountability measures across a highly decentralized network of state and local branches.
It's kind of the difference between saying, we should get in shape, and actually waking up at 5 a.m. to run.
That is a perfect way to put it.
And McWilson clearly understands this organizational psychology, right? Like, he doesn't just send a letter saying, please do better. He weaponizes the NAACP's own mythology against them.
He absolutely does. He appeals directly to the historical legacy of the organization, reminding Chairman Russell and CEO Derek Johnson that they are the standard bearers of civil rights.
Yeah.
He writes that moving decisively from a mere resolution to full-scale restorative implementation is an act of historical continuity.
Basically, he traps them in their own history.
Exactly.
Because the NAACP fought the ultimate educational battle in Brown v. Board of Education. They are the ones who legally proved that systemic educational inequality is unconstitutional. So to fail to deploy a volunteer-led cost-free plan now, in the face of what he sees as new aggressive threats, it's framed as a direct betrayal of their own founding mission statement.
It is a masterful administrative trap, and it really sets the stage for the second letter in our sources, dated April 18th, 2026. Because McWilson knows that historical guilt alone won't move a bureaucracy.
Right. Guilt only gets you so far.
Exactly. So he delivers a highly specific 7-step blueprint to force the organization into immediate deployment with a hard deadline of May 8th, 2026.
So how do you force a massive, century-old ship to turn on a dime? Let's look at the mechanics of change he proposes here, because he doesn't just give them a loose to-do list. He attacks the institutional bottlenecks from 3 distinct angles, right? Top-down enforcement, internal integration, and public legality.
Let's start with the top-down enforcement, which covers his first, second, and 7th demands.
Okay.
He demands an immediate directive be sent to all 37 state conference presidents and the 2,000 local branch presidents requiring full engagement.
Just a total mandate.
Yes, but a directive alone isn't enough, and he knows that. He also demands an emergency accountability meeting of the key committees, so the Education Advocacy Policy, and the task force to establish a binding implementation timeline with measurable benchmarks.
That concept of measurable benchmarks is so huge. Like, you can't just release a PR statement saying, we are committed to education.
Right, talk is cheap.
You actually have to prove how many branches have implemented the Steubenville models by what exact date.
Exactly. And the Demand 7 serves as the receipt for all of that. He wants a written response delivered to the task force and the board no later than May 8, detailing the specific steps taken.
Does that kind of rigid accountability actually work in a volunteer organization, though?
It forces the executive layer to take ownership. You see, without benchmarks, a localized branch can easily say they simply didn't have the capacity to launch the program. But by forcing the national office to collect the receipts, McWilson is making the leadership responsible for those localized failures.
Okay, so that handles the enforcement piece. The next angle is breaking down the internal silos. Demand 3 is to designate this data-driven campaign as the NAACP's absolute #1 education advocacy priority.
Yes.
And Demand 4 is to activate the unified NAACP academic SMART plan.
The SMART plan is critical here. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
But more importantly, the letter states this must be one NAACP academic plan, one NAACP team.
Because in massive organizations, you usually have the legal team fighting one battle, the communications team running a totally different campaign,
Yeah.
and the local branches just doing their own thing.
Exactly. It's totally fractured. McWilson is demanding absolute synchronization. Every single resource the NAACP has must point at this one specific shield.
Which leads perfectly into the final angle, public and legal legitimacy. Demand 5 is to launch a national media and communications campaign.
Put it on social media, release press statements, integrate it into the annual academic reporting.
Just make it so painfully public that the organization cannot quietly walk it back in a month.
Precisely. And that public commitment is solidified by Demand 6, which is perhaps the most strategically fascinating piece of this entire document.
Oh, I love Demand 6. It is brilliant.
The author demands that the Office of the General Counsel issue a formal opinion on the educational implications of Brown v. Board of Education as it relates to this specific campaign.
Calling in the General Counsel to connect this modern program to Brown v. Board, it literally forces the NAACP's legal arm to officially tie this cost-free parent-volunteer campaign to their most famous foundational historical victory.
Yes, it creates an impenetrable shield of legitimacy. Because if the General Counsel officially states that deploying these academic practice models is a modern continuation of the legal mandate established by Brown v. Board, well, it immediately elevates the campaign from a nice-to-have volunteer project to a constitutionally rooted mandate.
Right.
It means any branch president who ignores the rollout isn't just ignoring a memo from corporate. They are ignoring the legal foundation of the NAACP itself.
He leaves them absolutely no bureaucratic hiding place. He removes the excuse of money by making it cost-free. He removes the excuse of time by setting a hard May 8 deadline.
Yeah.
He removes the excuse of localized confusion by demanding a synchronized, smart plan. And he removes the excuse of irrelevance by legally tethering it to their greatest historical victory.
It is an aggressive, uncompromising strategy. The frustration in the text is palpable because, as the letter explicitly points out, this asks for no new mandates beyond what the board itself has already voted to authorize.
Right.
It costs only the will to act.
It costs only the will to act.
Yeah.
Man. So let's pull all of this together and look at the bigger picture of what we've unpacked today. We started with the mystery of a 17-month delayed, completely cost-free educational campaign.
We did.
We dug into the profound psychological and historical stakes, this terrifying concept of educational phagocytosis and menticide, where a system actively consumes the potential of Black youth by erasing their identity.
And then we explored the immediate catalyst that drove McWilson to write these letters in April 2026. The author perceives the policy agenda of Project 2025, the dismantling of DEI, the targeting of Title I funding, the banning of honest history as an accelerating blitzkrieg that requires an immediate systemic defense.
We looked at the mechanism of that defense, right?
Yeah.
These community-integrated, volunteer-driven academic practice models that serve as literal armor for 7 million students.
Yeah, the Steubenville models.
Exactly. And finally, we walked through a masterclass in organizational disruption. The 7-point ultimatum delivered to the absolute top of the NAACP, demanding they move from passive board resolutions to active, unified deployment by weaponizing their own legal and moral legacy.
It really provides a stark look at the tension between urgent grassroots necessity and the inherent sluggishness of institutional momentum.
Yeah, it really does.
The tools for defense are fully built, entirely approved, and cost absolutely nothing to deploy. The only missing element is the executive order to move.
It leaves you wondering about the very nature of these massive historical institutions that we rely on. Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. When a legacy organization is built from the ground up, over a century to fight for equality and justice, what happens when its own internal bureaucracy becomes the very thing delaying that fight?
Right.
Can a century-old civil rights giant learn to maneuver fast enough to counter modern, rapid-fire policy shifts? Or will the fire extinguisher stay locked in the glass case until the flames have already consumed the house?
It really is a question of survival for both the institution and the people it was built to protect.
Keep questioning the speed and the mechanisms of the institutions you rely on. Look closely at where the bottlenecks really are, and we will catch you next time.